Welcome back to the ChrisRodMaxShow. We bring you all the latest AI news, and this week on funding side, we wanted to showcase all the latest funding news about latest startups. Right. Without further ado, I think we also have Chris Rod jumping in to share a little bit about some of the interesting funding this week. We want to unearth some of the latest companies that are being built as we speak. In terms of funding news, we have about 10 companies to go through really quickly. And I think the one that is most exciting to me was Figure. Figure is basically a robotics company, which is backed by major tech players, Nvidia, Intel, Qualcomm, your usual suspects. They're all in there. I think what's interesting about this is basically the building of robotics and humanoid, right? So it's basically AI plus a robot to kind of work out what will happen in the world. I guess the round wise, they raised about $1 billion of Series C, value at $39 billion. And it's pretty big amount. My general sense is I think robot is coming. I don't know what the return on it yet, but I think it will definitely do a lot of the job, even in like a controlled environment, or even if it's in a relatively, I would say, dangerous environment, you can send a robot instead of human.
Honestly, for me, it's like billion is the new million, right? Are we really in a phase of inflation? And I mean, robotics will just like consume even more funding, right? Like when I hear more than 1 billion in Series C at a 39 billion valuation, I mean, this is crazy, guys, right? Like just the funding amount that has actually flown into it. Not even sure if the valuation is as big for that, right? Like we had these other cases, I think Uber at a time, or Didi at the time, was like sort of like raising in the millions, but then getting a billion valuation. We're here now in a completely different ballpark, I would say.
I suspect it will actually accelerate, especially with the potential ousting of the current Fed chair and printing more money. Basically, money just gets more in the world. The first one that I was particularly interested in, especially on the humanoid side, we haven't quite seen a lot of it, so it's quite interesting. Next thing, which is very exciting also for me, simply because we're seeing a contender to, I guess, the usual monopoly, duopoly on the phone place. We haven't found a hardware startup for a long time. So there's a company called Nothing. And they raised 200 million of Series C, basically making them a latest edition or latest unicorn edition in London. So just a background, right? Nothing is a London-based hardware consumer hardware startup, basically building on like AI native OS or for certain small devices, right? So you can think of headphones, I believe they have. They also have phones as well. So slightly adjacent. Again, it's a mix of AI plus hardware. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yes, they're slated to launch next year their first AI native devices. So we'd see, just as here Chris was saying, that all these hardware players require a lot of funding, be it robotics or just consumer devices. Same story here. We gotta see, we had already earlier in this AI race some who tried to do AI first assistants, hardware assistants. That didn't work that well because hardware is so hard to get right. And yeah, so let's see with nothing. So wishing them luck.
Next on the list, we also have PsiQuantum. So PsiQuantum Quantum. So it's about, there is about, again, another $1 billion series, but it's a Series E valuation at 7 billion, a lot smaller, but on a quantum computing photonics. The whole idea is basically build a fault tolerant quantum systems and test bed. I think from a long-term perspective, I think this could be super interesting. Instead of just building out data centers on using your general compute, I think with quantum compute, it could really change how AI is being delivered and also the amount of intelligence that may come from it. I don't know what both your thoughts are, Chris, Rod. I generally felt that this is like true innovation at its core, right? Really trying to change how compute is being done.
Yeah, definitely. I think we're really talking about basic research, and I think the quantum computing moment breakout has not happened just yet. I think for what it's worth, it's probably the right time to invest into the technology, and probably in like 5 years or so, we do see that raise on that front. So that one is interesting. Obviously, lots of PhD, especially in Singapore, also looking into the field.
Yeah, so always with quantum computing, it's something where we are very close to having it, but then turns out it's a bit elusive and so on. Very exciting. I've always been excited about quantum computing over the decades, but then if this lead some breakthroughs for commercialization and so on, that remains to be seen. But here also we see how these edge frontier technologies, they just require so much capital to run and to operate.
Yeah, super interesting. And then next, we have a little bit of I would say, different service. Another company that recently raised, it's Indicium. So Indicium, and basically Databricks, which is a large AI company now, took a small minority stake. What's particularly interesting is that Indicium is a data and AI consultancy. We previously talked about how the forward deploy engineer model is being deployed. So we're actually seeing that live, right? Databricks is basically acquiring some capabilities. Presumably, in my head, they are trying to use that as a lever for people to use more of Databricks. So I thought that is also interesting. I suspect this is going to come even more for all the existing AI companies or existing large SaaS companies that try to transition to AI.
Definitely. To be honest, I wonder. I mean, it's not like they get funding per se, right? It's more like they probably have some kind of collaboration or partnership going on. It also shows that there is a path for consulting companies to actually pivot their business model, perhaps collaborate and partner with some of these, more software players or AI players. And I'm sure the big guns like McKinsey and BCG, they're also already like in talks with a few AI companies just to like provide AI consultancy. And I also believe that that's really an interesting niche to go after, because so many companies are struggling to understand the AI strategy, right? Like I think especially European companies are still struggling with just the notion of digitization, right? And now you have this wave of AI, and how's that going to impact their business model? So I do think that that makes a lot of sense. It's not necessarily a startup play and VC play. It's more like a partnership or even a JV, if you will.
Yeah, I think the amount of consultancy, it's just like, during the app era, everyone started building application. You're a lot of dev house. So I feel like this is another level of those dev house, but then for AI applications. It's just taking it a little bit further. Cool. Next round. So we have Vega, which is a new Israeli cybersecurity startup. Cybersecurity startups are on a tear. The amount of cybersecurity startups I heard that is AI related and got acquired in the last few months is amazing. And this one was new, a 65 million raise led by Axel with a valuation of 400 million. Basically, the whole idea is provide faster securities, analytics and processing in places in which you will find the application. So I think the especially with AI, if as people, I would say, deploy more of it, security becomes even more interesting. And talking about how the entire pipeline will work, what evals will be like, whether or not you do prompt injection, I think all this are super interesting. I mean, Rod, given that you're a practitioner yourself, what are your thoughts around all this AI startups?
Well, for cybersecurity, we're seeing how it's becoming easier to basically create deep fakes that reproduce voice, video, image, and so on. And then this makes it even more relevant that any type of like countering or deterrence for these efforts in generating very realistic assets of someone can be somehow deterred. And yeah, so for me, it makes here total sense that this is happening. And we need more of that, given that how things are getting, even for experts, difficult to discern what was generated, what wasn't, and even more so for like just normal people. So there needs to be some way to just detect that and maybe like avoid that this leads to catastrophe for some individuals who are affected by these deepfakes and other fraud campaigns.
I think two more interesting ones in my head, which is one on music, and the other one is basically using voice, which is some of the emerging user behavior. So let's start off with the first one on Verso. They raised a 6 million Series A. I think now at like 10 million total funding. It's basically a platform for online music collaboration, right? So you could use an AI tools to co-write, produce music, which is super interesting. I think we already see previous mixes from AI. I think there was also a new AI idols that come out of, I don't know where, one part of Asia, I believe, and as well as the US. I thought that was really cool. And then, on the voice side as well, you have Altan, Altan, that just raised 2.5 million pre-seed based out in Barcelona. What a place to be. To build, I would say, application via text or voice with multiple AI agents coordinating. I particularly like the voice part, right? So we talk about how early on, if you, let's say you have an MD in and going into a market conversation, you could just ask it to build. And then now you can do that with application. So it's super interesting. And then I think for last one on funding, it's basically Anaconda, a well-known open source Python for data science backbone, raised about 150 million of Series C at 1.5 billion. I think as a practitioner, Rod, if you have anything to add, it would be super cool to hear your thoughts on this.
Yes, Anaconda has been in the space now for over a decade, and it has very interesting stories. So at some point we could discuss further in detail. But basically, the gist here is that if you're a practitioner and want an easy way how to get started with all these different frameworks, not even like Gen AI related, but just like classic data science, classic machine learning, then Anaconda is like a one-stop shop solution. And so it's pretty much, there are alternatives, but they are a little bit like the main player in the market. So it's justifiable that they can raise these amounts, considering that they have such a strong brand and likely the largest market share in the space.
Great. And with that, I conclude this week's funding news, and tune in for more. Thank you so much, Chris, Rod, as well as all our audiences for joining us, where every week we bring you the latest, most exciting news in AI. Tune in, subscribe, and we will speak to you soon.